What would you do if the person you trusted most, your own flesh and blood, utterly devastated your life while you were at your weakest? That's the question I had to answer when I learned my son, while I was hospitalized, sold our family home. How do you rebuild not just a house but your life after such a profound act of betrayal?
Before we dive into this story, I just want to share something from my heart. I'm a 34-year-old woman working hard all alone to keep this channel alive. I believe Jesus gives strength to those who struggle, and today I humbly ask for your support. If you love Jesus, please support me with just one subscribe. It may seem small to you, but for me, it's a blessing that can keep me going.
My name is Isabella, and I never imagined coming home could feel like walking into a nightmare. After a week in the hospital recovering from surgery, I returned with the hope of seeing familiar comfort, a house filled with warmth, and my son greeting me with a smile. But what I found shattered everything. The driveway was littered with cardboard boxes, my belongings spilling out into the wet grass. My books, photo albums, kitchenware, even my grandmother's delicate china, everything was tossed outside like trash. A sold sign was planted in the yard, a cruel announcement that my sanctuary had been taken from me. I froze, staring at the devastation, my chest tightening with disbelief. The neighbors peeked through their windows, whispers carrying the horror of what had been done. And there he was, my son Lucas, standing on the porch, holding a set of keys as though this were an ordinary day. "Mom." I sold the house," he said, attempting a shrug that felt like a mask for guilt. Shock immobilized me. "You did what?" My voice wavered, cracking under the weight of betrayal. I had raised him, trusted him, shared my life with him, and now he had taken everything I loved in a single selfish act. Lucas shrugged again. "I needed the money. You weren't here anyway," his words cut like knives. He thought I was weak, recovering, and vulnerable, easy to manipulate. But he didn't know me. I was furious, but I forced myself to breathe, to think. Anger alone wouldn't fix this. I needed a plan. I carefully observed the boxes, noting their contents. Photographs ruined, heirlooms broken, my life displayed carelessly on the curb. My mind raced. I had to gather evidence, document everything, and understand how he had managed this sale behind my back. This wasn't just about property. It was about trust, betrayal, and reclaiming control over a life someone thought they could steal from me. Lucas had underestimated his mother, and that would be his biggest mistake. I stormed up the porch, hands trembling but voice steady. "Lucas, what made you think you could do this? Sell our home without even talking to me?" He looked at me, feigning innocence. "Mom, I thought you wouldn't care. You've been in the hospital. I needed money." "Needed money?" I repeated, each word sharp. "Do you understand the weight of your actions? This isn't just a transaction. It's our life, our history." He avoided my gaze, fidgeting with the keys. I thought it was fine. "You weren't here." The audacity made my blood boil. I realized quickly that he didn't see the emotional cost of his betrayal. He thought financial gain justified his deceit. I had to remain calm, but I also knew I couldn't let him walk away believing this was acceptable. I walked through the scattered boxes, documenting each item mentally. Photographs torn, my jewelry box shattered, my personal files soaked by the rain. He had been reckless, careless, and arrogant. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step back. Immediate confrontation fueled by rage could make him defensive. No, I needed evidence, a plan, and a path to reclaiming what was mine. I made a silent vow. He would not get away with this. As the initial shock subsided, I began to piece together the extent of his deceit. Lucas had not just thrown out my belongings. He had arranged the sale of the house entirely on his own. He had forged signatures, misrepresented documents, and ignored any legal considerations. I realized this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had planned this meticulously while I was incapacitated in the hospital. The trust I had placed in him had been weaponized against me. Every detail of the house sale needed investigation. I would trace the money, uncover the contracts, and expose his fraud. Lucas had made a fatal error. He had assumed I was powerless. The hours after discovering the sale were some of the longest in my life. I sat on the porch steps, rain dripping from the roof, staring at the boxes scattered across the lawn. Each soaked photograph, each broken trinket felt like a dagger to my heart. I had raised Lucas, nurtured him, trusted him, and now he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Tears burned my eyes, but I couldn't let myself cry completely. My body shook with a mix of grief and anger, each emotion feeding the other. I replayed the events in my mind: the hospital stay, my weakened state, the perfect opportunity he had exploited. He had assumed that my vulnerability meant I couldn't act, couldn't fight back. But my mind wasn't clouded entirely by emotion. Slowly, I started focusing on the facts. I began mentally noting everything: the keys in his hand, the sold sign, the way he avoided eye contact when confronted. I realized I needed control, and to gain that, I needed a plan. I stood and walked through the boxes again, this time carefully inspecting them. My grandmother's china, my childhood photographs, old letters, everything ruined, yet every item told me something important. These were pieces of my life, and I would not let them be taken without consequences. The next day, I started watching Lucas closely. He moved through the house and yard as if nothing had happened, almost proud of his audacity. I realized quickly that he believed he had outsmarted me. That arrogance would be his undoing. I listened to his phone calls from a distance, noting who he spoke to, what names and companies he mentioned, and any hint of the sales details. Every conversation, every careless word became a potential piece of evidence. At the same time, I observed his interactions with neighbors and friends, seeing how he presented the situation publicly. He acted casual, confident, unafraid of judgment. It made my resolve stronger. Not only would I reclaim the house, but I would also make him face the consequences for his betrayal, and he wouldn't be able to hide behind arrogance or charm. I began jotting down observations in a notebook, documenting times, dates, and statements. Every slip, every casual lie was a thread I could pull. Lucas had underestimated me completely, and that miscalculation would cost him dearly. By evening, I had compiled a preliminary list: the sale documents, emails confirming transfers, witnesses who had seen him handling the sale without my knowledge. I realized I couldn't act blindly. This required strategy. I contacted a lawyer I trusted, sharing the situation carefully, asking for advice on reclaiming the property legally and protecting my assets. At the same time, I kept Lucas unaware that I was gathering evidence. Any hint of my intentions would make him cover his tracks more thoroughly. That night, I sat in my ruined living room, boxes piled around me like monuments to betrayal. I drafted a plan step by step: gather full legal evidence, ensure witnesses were ready, protect my finances, and confront him when I had absolute certainty of success. The anger still burned, but it had transformed into focus. Shock had turned into strategy. I had been blindsided, yes, but no one who betrayed me would walk away unscathed. After the initial shock subsided, I knew I couldn't act on emotion alone. I needed legal guidance. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer I had worked with years ago, someone I trusted implicitly. Sitting across from him in his office, I explained the situation, my voice steady but edged with anger. "My son sold my house behind my back while I was hospitalized," I said, laying out the documents I had salvaged from the boxes. "I need to know my options, and I need to reclaim my property." The lawyer examined the papers carefully. "This is serious," he said. "If the sale was completed without your consent or proper authorization, we have grounds to challenge it. We'll need everything: emails, contracts, witnesses, proof of your incapacitation at the time." Hearing that gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since discovering the betrayal. I left the office determined, my anger sharpened into strategy. I had to collect every shred of evidence before Lucas realized what I was planning. Back home, I began tracing the money from the sale. Bank statements, digital transfers, and account logs became my battlefield. Lucas hadn't been as careful as he thought. Tiny mistakes in labeling transfers and missing timestamps provided clues I could exploit. I documented every transaction meticulously, creating a timeline of how he profited from the sale. Each number, each transfer, added another layer to the case I was building. I realized that the more thorough my record, the stronger my position would be, not just legally, but morally. By the end of the day, I had a spreadsheet detailing every move ready to hand to my lawyer. Lucas's arrogance had become his weakness. I discreetly reached out to neighbors and friends who had interacted with Lucas during the sale. Some had seen him signing documents, others had noticed him meeting with the real estate agent alone. I explained the situation carefully, asking them to document their observations without revealing my entire plan. Their statements became crucial pieces of evidence, corroborating the timeline of deceit. Every witness added pressure, silently closing the net around him. Lucas had assumed he was untouchable, but reality was beginning to form a cage he couldn't escape. Next, I turned to emails and texts. My son had communicated with the buyer and the agent through messages, some of which were casual and careless. Screenshots, saved emails, and metadata provided undeniable proof of his intent and actions. I organized everything chronologically, ensuring no gaps. Each piece of digital proof told a story. He knew what he was doing, he did it without consent, and he thought he could get away with it. As I gathered evidence, I also observed Lucas closely. He was unaware I was documenting everything. He bragged to friends about how easy it was to sell the house and how he outsmarted me. Every boast, every careless comment strengthened my case. I took mental notes, comparing them to the evidence I had collected. By the time I confronted him, there would be no room for lies or manipulation. By the end of the week, I had assembled a complete dossier, financial records, witness statements, emails, and evidence of his boasts. I met with my lawyer to finalize the legal strategy. We planned the steps: temporary injunction to stop any further transactions, filing the case to reclaim the property, and preparing for Lucas's inevitable denials. I felt a calm satisfaction. Shock and betrayal had transformed into strategy and control. Lucas had underestimated me completely, and that would be his greatest mistake. With all evidence in hand, I began to set the stage. Lucas believed he had already won, that his mother was weak and unable to act. That arrogance became my advantage. I decided to let him reveal more of his intentions, giving me even more proof. I feigned a casual attitude at home, pretending to move on while quietly observing him. Every phone call he made, every casual brag to friends about the house sale, I documented. Even his attempts to hide certain transactions only strengthened my case. I realized that the more he exposed himself, the stronger my position became. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating. Every step I took was deliberate, designed to ensure that when the time came, I would strike decisively and leave no room for his excuses. Lucas began to grow bolder. He invited friends over, showing off the money he'd gained, unaware that every boast was being documented. I sat quietly, recording dates, times, and statements. He didn't know I had been monitoring everything. Each careless comment, each brag, became a piece of the puzzle. His confidence was his weakness. By letting him believe he had nothing to fear, I ensured that the evidence I needed would appear naturally, without confrontation. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Patience was proving more powerful than anger. I returned to my lawyer, presenting the new evidence: Lucas's admissions, witness statements, and financial tracking. Together, we mapped out the steps to reverse the sale, secure a temporary injunction, and prepare for the court proceedings. We also discussed potential counterclaims he might try and planned preemptive responses. I felt the power shift subtly toward me. Lucas, once the perpetrator, was about to face consequences he couldn't escape. I began casually dropping hints about legal consultation during conversations at home. Lucas reacted predictably: nervous glances, over-explaining minor actions, subtle defensiveness. Every reaction confirmed my assumptions. He had no plan for when his deceit was challenged. I made mental notes, documenting his responses. This would be crucial in court, showing intent, awareness, and deceit. I spent the next few days finalizing the dossier: contracts, bank records, witness testimonies, and digital communications. Each item was cross-referenced, time-stamped, and corroborated. Lucas had underestimated my precision. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of his deception, and I felt ready. With evidence complete, I planned the confrontation. It needed to be calm, deliberate, and undeniable. I wanted Lucas to face the reality of his actions, not just in court, but emotionally, realizing that trust betrayed had consequences. I mapped out the sequence: present evidence, call witnesses, let him respond, and secure the reversal of the sale. Timing and control were everything. The night before executing the plan, I sat in the living room surrounded by the scattered boxes that had started this nightmare. I reviewed every detail one last time, rehearsing the confrontation in my mind. Shock had become strategy. Betrayal had become leverage. And Lucas, who thought he had outsmarted me, had no idea that his mother was about to reclaim control completely. I decided it was time. Lucas had grown overconfident, believing he had already won. I invited him to the house under the pretense of discussing moving forward. The tension was electric, but I stayed calm. Every movement measured. "Lucas," I began, voice steady. "We need to talk about the house." He smirked. I thought that was already settled. I did what had to be done. I held up a folder containing bank statements, emails, and contracts. "Do you recognize these?" I asked. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. Each transaction, each signature, each email proved that he had acted without consent. I didn't think," he stammered. "You didn't think? You sold my home while I was in the hospital," I said sharply. "You thought I'd be powerless, that you could take everything and walk away unchallenged. But here we are." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The arrogance had cracked. I began laying out the evidence methodically. Emails between him and the buyer, screenshots of his communications, witness statements from neighbors who had seen him signing documents. Every piece told the same story: deliberate deceit, intentional fraud, and betrayal of trust. Lucas tried to interrupt, but I didn't allow it. Each attempt to justify his actions only made the case stronger. I calmly explained the legal implications, the possibility of reversing the sale, and the evidence that clearly demonstrated his malicious intent. He was quiet now, the smirk gone, replaced by a panicked realization. He had underestimated me completely, and that mistake would cost him dearly. Next, I called in a few witnesses, neighbors who had observed him handling the sale and friends who had heard his boasts. They confirmed everything, their statements matching my documentation perfectly. Lucas squirmed as each person spoke, his excuses falling flat. He had thought charm and manipulation would save him, but now the truth was undeniable. He could not argue with evidence, witnesses, and legal facts all aligned against him. My lawyer entered, finalizing the paperwork for the injunction to halt the sale and start the legal proceedings to reclaim the house. Lucas realized he couldn't manipulate or intimidate the situation anymore. I remained composed, letting the legal weight of the evidence do the talking. Watching him process that he had underestimated his mother, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Panic settled over him as he realized the depth of his mistake. He tried to bargain, plead, even lie further, but every move backfired. The documentation and witnesses left no room for negotiation. I watched silently, my calm in stark contrast to his desperation. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, proving that betrayal has consequences. Within days, the court approved the reversal of the sale. I had regained full ownership of the house. The boxes outside were moved back in, and I began restoring my belongings, each item a symbol of resilience. Lucas could only watch, defeated as his plan crumbled. The arrogance and impulsiveness that led him to act so recklessly had met their match. Word spread among family and friends about the betrayal and the legal outcome. Lucas's reputation suffered. He was no longer the confident, untouchable son. People began to see his manipulations for what they were, and his arrogance became a cautionary tale. I didn't gloat. I let the truth speak for itself. Justice had been served. Finally, I faced him one last time. "You thought you could take from me and walk away unpunished?" I said softly. "But you underestimated your mother." He lowered his head, silent. There was nothing left to say. He had lost not only the house, but the trust he had broken. For me, it wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about proving that betrayal can be met with strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. With the court ruling in my favor, I finally walked back into my home, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't experienced since the hospital incident. Boxes that had once been symbols of betrayal were now organized and restored to their rightful places. Every item reminded me of resilience, of reclaiming what was mine. Lucas avoided eye contact, subdued and quiet. I could see the weight of realization pressing down on him. He had thought he could deceive me, but he hadn't accounted for strategy, patience, and diligence. I had not only reclaimed my home, but also demonstrated the consequences of his betrayal in full. It wasn't just about property. It was about reestablishing boundaries, asserting authority, and showing that deception would never succeed unchecked. I felt a renewed sense of confidence. In the quiet moments that followed, I reflected on the months of betrayal, shock, and strategy. Lucas's actions had cut deep, but they had also taught me invaluable lessons about trust, vigilance, and the importance of protecting oneself. I realized that true power isn't rooted in anger or impulsive retaliation. It lies in patience, observation, and careful planning. Betrayal had tested me, but it had also revealed my strength. I felt no hatred, only clarity. I understood now that those who act recklessly, without respect for others, will eventually face consequences. My extended family, who had been distant during the turmoil, now reached out with concern and support. They expressed admiration for how I had handled the situation and reassured me that they understood the severity of Lucas's actions. Through honest conversations, I began rebuilding relationships, ensuring that trust could be restored where it had been broken. It became clear that boundaries were essential, not just for Lucas, but for everyone around me. This ordeal strengthened my sense of self. I no longer allowed fear or uncertainty to dominate my decisions. Instead, I embraced a proactive mindset, always prepared to protect myself and those I care about. I also realized the importance of documenting and safeguarding important assets, AE, lesson learned through bitter experience. Lucas and I had a serious conversation about boundaries, expectations, and respect. I made it clear that any future actions that undermined trust or disrespected family would have consequences. For the first time, he listened. Perhaps not entirely willingly, but he understood that his mother would no longer be someone he could manipulate. Days turned into weeks, and the house felt like home again. I reorganized, redecorated, and restored the comfort that had been disrupted. I focused on my well-being, hobbies, and relationships outside of the immediate family drama. Peace, once thought impossible, was slowly returning. One evening, as I walked through the living room, I paused to look at the boxes that had once symbolized betrayal. I smiled softly, knowing that I had turned a painful situation into a triumph. Lucas had learned the consequences of deceit. I had reclaimed my life, my home, and my peace of mind. I stood by the window, watching the sun set over the restored home. I whispered to myself. He thought he could break me. But I didn't just survive, I won. The betrayal that once threatened to consume me had been transformed into a story of strength, strategy, and justice. I felt empowered, clear, and free, knowing that no deception could ever take away my resilience.